Hi everyone, by way of introduction, my name is Blonde Evans and I'm Head of the Employment and Corporate Immigration Department here in the Mann Solicitors. Today I want to talk to you about the health and safety protocol that came in May of this year and was a result of discussions that went on from the government and the Health and Safety Authority. The purpose of this document, which is a live document and is changing daily, is to put in procedures in place which employers must follow in terms of their returning back to the workplace. This document is seen as compulsory and employers must comply with it. So there's a lot of information contained in it. The purpose of my talk today is to just highlight what I see as the minimum 5 key considerations that employers need to consider when preparing to return to work in line with this protocol. So the 5 areas that I want to talk to you today about are: number 1, the COVID-19 response plan; number 2, your training, collaboration and communication; 3, a pre-return to work form; 4, temperature testing; and then 5, the enforcement mechanisms for non-compliance with the protocol. So we'll get dug in. So the first one I want to talk to you about is the COVID response plan. So this is a plan that the protocol says all employers must put in place if you haven't already done so, and it must be in place before you return to work. The plan should include a risk assessment and a safety statement, a plan of how to deal with any suspected cases of COVID-19, how to deal with any absenteeism arising from COVID-19, and then the implementation of measures in order to reduce the risk of COVID-19. So as part of this as well, in your response plan, you should deal with and consider an isolation area. And this is the deal when you might have suspected cases of both your staff and or visitors. Ideally, this should be away from people as much as possible in a closed off area. But obviously this will depend on the workspace and how that's set up. But the key is that it's behind a closed door and that the area can be confined off. The other thing that should be considered here is contact tracing. As you know, the big part of how we've dealt with COVID-19 is tracing back how people have contacted the disease. So when you have visitors coming, there should be a log of who's coming to your office, to your factory, whatever that might be, so that if there is a case, the employer can go back and track how potentially that person might have got COVID-19. And then in terms of just doing their physical actual risk assessment of the workspace, what sort of things you need to consider. So I'd look at the physical space. So that's stuff from like your canteen, the desk, reception, toilets. How are you going to manage all of that? How are you going to control social distancing? How are you going to manage, making sure that everybody cleans all the surfaces, putting hand sanitizers out, all of those things. You need to consider all of those factors. And then also it's people attending the office. So most employers, what they're doing is saying, that visitors should only attend in limited circumstances. So that should be encouraged. Travel should be discouraged except in limited circumstances. So all these things, you need to sort of think about your daily day work as it was pre-COVID, and then how you're going to change that coming back post-COVID or even during COVID. And as well, it's a key. One of the other key things is in the protocol is that you must have what's called lead worker representatives. So they're going to be there on behalf of the staff to consult with management in terms of any sort of COVID-19 related issues. The protocol is limited. I think I said you should have at least one person. So depending on the size of the workforce, you may want to have more than one, or indeed you may just decide to have one person. In a lot of cases, the worker representative is also the same as the health and safety officers that you would have under the health and safety legislation. So then number 2, the second key issue that I see here is training, collaboration, and communication. There is no doubt the communication with your staff is a key requirement. You need to get them involved, you need them to be invested, you need to sort of see the benefits to them as reciprocal for the company. And to remember, in light of all of this protocol was based on the Safety, Health and Welfare Work Act, and that provides an employer must provide a safe place of work and a safe system of work. And once those mechanisms in place, the employee has a reciprocal duty to implement those requirements in order to maintain the safe place. So this is how the communication works, collaboration works, getting everybody involved. So in terms of the training, obviously you need to do this before you return to the workplace. This can be done virtually by Zoom or Teams, whatever mechanism you might use. But you will talk to staff through the risk assessments that we've done, any changes to your safety statement, the response plan, what things you're doing in terms of social distancing, if you're doing a staggered workplace, how you might do that, what's going to happen if somebody has the virus or there's a suspected case of the virus, how that's to be reported, explain the purpose of the lead worker representative, and if they should talk to them. So that's the sort of things you need to be thinking as part of your training. If you're closing the canteen, you need to make that known. You need to make staff aware of that. If you've got PPE in place, informing staff when they need to use that, where it's available, all of these things, just think about it on a day-to-day basis, and then informing your staff accordingly. So then the third thing here is the return to work form. So this again is seen as a compulsory requirement. It's a form that you need your staff to fill out at least 3 I know in our organisation we were using the likes of DocuSign. It can be an online form, or again you can send it whatever way it works for you. But the questions that you need to ask is, firstly, does the employee have any of the symptoms that are related to COVID? Next, has the person been confirmed or diagnosed or suspected of having COVID-19? And then have they come into contact with anybody that is potentially diagnosed or suspected of it? Or have they been medically certified to either self-isolate or cocoon? And if they answer in the positive to any of those, then you shouldn't be letting them back into the workplace. So the next one, our fourth key consideration here, is temperature testing. The protocol is not giving a lot of information on this, only that they recommend that you should be doing temperature testing. And what I would say about temperature testing is it's a good idea, but you need to balance this in line with GDPR requirements, because it is sensitive data. You need to be careful when you use the data. Again, this will depend how you're doing the temperature testing. If it's just a straightforward thermometer and the information is disregarded straight away, it's quite limited, in terms of the data protection side. But the reality is you'll probably be keeping some sort of logs. You may need to update your privacy statement in line with this. You need to be careful of each employee's rights and personal data. And so the things you want to make sure is that you introduce strict time limits in terms of the erasure of this data for temperature testing, minimizing any data that's processed around this, and ensure that adequate staff training is done. So if there is a dedicated person who's doing temperature testing, they need to be trained on how this information is used, explain that it is sensitive personal data and that it's confidential. There's a lot of thought out there that one of people's main concern, obviously from health risk, is their data protection rights in terms of this very sort of special categorized personal data that's out there. And then finally, my fifth consideration is just the side of the enforcement and compliance. As I said, this protocol was designed with the HSA. So the HSA inspectors can come around, they can do random audits, or they may get a tip off from anybody to come into the workplace. And if they see that you haven't complied with the protocol, they can issue notices. Now, usually what happens if the compliance is minimal, they might say an improvement notice, where they'll sort of give direction that you need to sort of put certain steps in place to improve that. If it's more serious or you don't comply with the improvement notice, they can issue a prohibition notice, which would mean that the business would be closed down pending the rectifying of the mistakes that have been made. And then also it's important to note that if somebody was to catch COVID-19 because you haven't implemented the protocol correctly, or you haven't complied with your own protocol in line of returning to work, the employer could be potentially found liable in terms of a potential personal injury claims if somebody was to get it. Now, obviously we have to see how that litigation is going to play out, but it certainly is possible. And it's not just the employer that can be liable under the health and safety legislation. Senior management can too. So it goes down the line, and it's important that anybody at that level is involved and is aware of their obligations, and everything is clearly communicated to staff. And when I say liable, there's the potential for criminal prosecution. So it is a serious matter. People's health is at risk from all of this, and time has been put into this protocol to make sure that enough safeguards have been put in place to protect the workplace. So that's it for today. As I said at the very start, the protocol is very much a live document. It's changing regularly in line with the World Health Organization, different information that we're getting from the medical evidence out there. Whilst you do create your plan for going back to work, do tie in with the protocol regularly to see if there's any changes, if you need to update your own policy. And when you are implementing the policy and doing the training, let your staff know what you're doing here is a live and moving document. You may need to make changes subject to more medical evidence or directions or guidance given by the government. Okay, thanks very much everyone.